Hey, and welcome back to the number one podcast in the sport where we'll give you as many episodes as you can handle. Now, depending on timings, I don't know if you've heard the one we did on Dubois in terms of tactics and how he can win. I think the Joshua one is kind of different because we've followed the Joshua story a bit more, if that makes sense. And we're more invested, whatever side of the line you are, whether he's the best thing ever or he's overhyped, we're all invested in Anthony Joshua. And, let me just nail my colors to the mast. My view on AJ kind of fluctuates. So on one hand, I now appreciate the effect he's had on British boxing. If you think back to the pre-Joshua days of David Price, and we were still fighting in dingy venues, and we weren't talking about multi-million-pound deals, and we weren't talking about events like we are now. I don't believe we have Riyadh season like this if it's not for Anthony Joshua. I don't believe we cobble together and create these domestic rivalries if it's not for Anthony Joshua. He brought big-time boxing back at a time when we needed it. We didn't know what was going to come after Froch Groves, and Joshua showed us what was possible and what he could do, right? And he's carried British boxing on his back. And so if this were to be Joshua's last fight, everyone would have to give him a standing ovation because he brought British boxing back, and he's essentially done it without the Americans. Let's not forget that. So there's a massive amount of respect for that. But then there's his record. And his record is informative in terms of the people who are not on his record. And that will always be the frustration with Joshua. Well, there'll be two frustrations. One, the people he didn't fight. And two, his 3 defeats came from fights he wouldn't have taken if given the option. So Ruiz was a stand-in and Usyk was a mandatory. The plan was, and I've always talked about this in relation to Project Joshua, the plan was to accumulate as much money as possible, not taking any defeats, and just navigate away from the big fish until you have 2 or 3 cash-out fights, and that hasn't happened. The 2 Usyk defeats effectively set Joshua back, and if you look, since he fought those guys, he's fought guys like, who did he fight? Jermaine Franklin, Otto Wallin, Robert Helenius, Francis Ngannou. And not like over the 28 fights, like in sequence. He fought these guys in sequence. And people are telling you he should be in the Hall of Fame, and you're like, I can't accept that. When you compare his last 4 with Dubois' last 4, you're like, worlds apart. And that's the frustration with AJ. Anthony Joshua out the ring, give the man a knighthood. Make him Lord Joshua of Meriden. Whatever you want to do, I wouldn't begrudge that. Because outside of the ring, I think he's been a force for incredible good. In the ring, nah. And here's the crazy thing. He's still probably the most dangerous heavyweight we've got. He may not be the best, but he's the most dangerous. It's like when you watch wrestling, like someone like Stone Cold will be world champion, or The Rock, or Triple H. They'd be world champion, right? And the Big Show would show up. And you knew the Big Show would never hold the belt, but the Big Show was the most dangerous man there because he was the biggest and he could throw people around for fun. It was the same with Mark Henry. And that's how I feel about Joshua. He's the most dangerous guy there because he has tools that can lay waste to people, like Wilder did. But Wilder tested his against some of the toughest people you can. And so I'll always have that inner conflict when it comes to Joshua. That's why I had to be honest and nail my colors to the mast. But I can respect what he's done and I can respect who he is. And in this fight against Daniel Dubois, Anthony Joshua is the favorite. And he's the favorite for a number of reasons. One, tactically, he lines up neatly with the things Dubois doesn't do well. But number two, he's been here before. And don't underestimate the importance of having been there before. And like This is what you want to put on the tactics board. Number one, Anthony Joshua's been there before. The walk's no different. He's probably staying in the same hotel room. The routine is set. They know exactly what they're doing. You know, some people probably come down to Watford and see him briefly. They'll know when they can see him, how much energy, try and get him in the right mental frame of mind. All that stuff will happen. Because it's happened before and he's been successful. So that part of it is really important. He's been there before. He's been at this level before. He's been questioned at this level before. He can relax a bit knowing that he can get through these days and all that matters to him is the fight. There's nothing new for him. That's really important when you see that Daniel is now having to carry that load. So there's that part of it, which I think is really important. That will give him confidence. The other thing that makes him strong, we'll put this number 2 on the tactics board, he has the tools. Joshua's pretty good with straight punches, right? We saw what he did to Ngannou. We've seen what he's done to guys like Charles Martin. We saw what he did to Vlad. For all of his sins and his faults, when he lets his shots go, he lets his shots go. Now, people say he's gun shy. Yeah, but he's getting older. You can't throw the same number of punches you threw before. So the gun shy thing, I half get, but not 100% get. But what's for absolute certain is when those punches detonate, they detonate. Because he's very rarely walked down. The only one I've seen really just go through the fire to get at him was Usyk. Actually, no, Ruiz too. But not many people do it. Hellenius didn't want any parts of that. Wallen wanted no parts of that. Jermaine Franklin tried, but he was underpowered. He couldn't do anything. So Joshua's got that. The other thing that you put on that board is big brother complex. So if you listen to the Dubois episode, you know that all Daniel's been focused on is AJ. And all AJ's been focused on is, well, name them, right? Name them. Dillian, Charles Martin, Vlad, Deontay, Tyson. He's been focused on so many people. He never really thought he'd have to deal with Daniel. So Daniel's just sort of come up, from the side, much like George Groves did with Carl Froch, where Carl was thinking about what are the biggest fights I can get, and this guy George comes out of nowhere, it's like, you've got to fight me. And so there's a lot of that, but what it means is Joshua's not going to create monsters in his head when it comes to Dubois. He's going to be like, this is a guy that I knew I could handle in sparring then, I know I can handle now because I believe I'm better. So I think that's going to be important as well. Another value add, I think, for AJ is having Ben Davison in the corner. People give Ben a hard time, but Ben will be sufficiently detailed that it will give AJ confidence, right? Yeah, they'll do their, I laugh when I say, because it's kind of funny, they'll do their film study, and they'll do their analysis and data capture and all those sorts of things using AI and cloud computing and all these things that we stole from McLaren F1. Right, they'll do all of that. And they'll give Joshua scenarios, and they'll say, if you do this, this will happen. If you do this, that will happen. And that's what AJ needs. And so they'll give that to him. Now, what does that look like is the question, right? I would argue, if Joshua wanted to beat Dubois on a 1-2, he could. Like, if I had Joshua sat next to me right now and he said, what would you do? Jab, backhand, second backhand. I'll go double jab, backhand, left hook to the body. Jab, backhand, backhand again. Double jab, backhand, left hook to the body, left hook to the head. I'd keep doing that until I had him bamboozled. And then I'd just feint jabs and boom, right hands down the middle till he wobbled. Would I target the eye socket? I wouldn't say I'd target it, but I wouldn't be afraid to hit that area and have him second guessing himself. And I would be doing that aggressively. I wouldn't be looking to outbox. I wouldn't be looking to dance. I'd be doing that aggressively and give myself a target of 6 rounds to stop Daniel Dubois. If Joshua was sat here, I'd say this shouldn't take more than 6 rounds. And if it does, there are real problems here, kiddo. Now, whether Anthony Joshua's got that in him, now that he's hit his mid-30s, I have no idea. But he's going to need something like that. Because the earlier you get little brother under control, the more of the psychological energy you have under your control. And that's going to be really important in this fight, because Joshua's going to take punches. Rest assured, he's going to take punches, and he has to get joy from the fact that he's hurting Daniel more than Daniel's hurting him. That's what he needs. But one thing I did want to ask, and you know, I don't have the access to AJ I feel I deserve, but I'd ask him, does he miss being in war mode? Because you watch AJ, and it started with the second Ruiz fight, and it's that kind of jab, sort of move around the ring, jab, pick shots off, wait till they get tired, then jump on them. I always wonder if AJ enjoys that, or is he happier when it's combative and it's a proper fight? Because that will determine what happens here. Because I don't know if anyone heard some of his media work. He's saying that this has to be his best ever performance. Well, you know, that's what the Usyk fight was meant to be. But I get where he's coming from in terms of, you know, he has to make a statement here, because as we said in the Dubois episode, the loser of this will be known as the guy that can't get it done. The guy who can't handle those elite guys. You don't want that label. You don't want to be labeled as a choker or a guy that falls under pressure, mentally weak, all of those things there. Because I don't think you get to this level by being mentally weak. But there's a real thing that doesn't get talked about. I'm going to come back to the tactical side in a second. I just want to talk about this, because I think this is really important. And it's true in the heavyweight division more than anywhere else, but it's equally true in other weight classes, right? When those heavyweights all get together, you know who the real animals are in that gym, in that group, sorry, the real warriors, the hard men. Yeah. In a room full of tough men, you know who the hard men are, because everyone looks to them. That's why if you notice when Lennox walks into a room, everyone looks to Lennox. When George Foreman walks into a room, everyone looks to George. When Larry Holmes walks into a room, everyone looks to Larry. Now, there are other guys like Evander, etc., and there's Ray Mercer. There are guys like Shannon Briggs. Hard men. Very hard men. Very hard men. And then there's kind of everyone else. And that's no disrespect to them as fighters. They're your guys like person X and person Y and person Z. And they're good boxers, and they've probably been in wars, but they won't get that same look. And when I look at AJ, I always go, is Joshua a hard man? And I go, no. Joshua looks like a good athlete, a good competitor, a guy who could throw his hand at triathlon or rugby or whatever, and he'd be competitive because he loves to compete. But he never gives off energy that says, do you know what? That's a hard man. That's a hard man. He's never given that off. And it's that vulnerability that people don't exploit, but they should. Drag him down into that deep water and go, who are you really? Like Ruiz did. And you saw what happened. Drag him down into that deep water like Usyk did and see what happens. I'm surprised more boxers don't do that. Jermaine Franklin tried. Everyone after that just flattered to deceive. But let's handbrake turn, spin it back around and go. If you're guiding AJ and you're saying, what should AJ do that's slightly different to what he's done before? I'd like to see the use of more uppercuts. We saw what Bacoli did to Anderson with those uppercuts. And here's why they're important. Most big men don't face uppercuts because they're so much taller than everyone else. They don't tend to face uppercuts. They know how to throw them, they don't face them. So they don't have those defensive patterns to cope. So if you start bringing uppercuts into your combinations, so if I go jab, right, uppercut, left hook, boom, I know I'm going to connect because he's not ready. So that's definitely something Joshua should be looking at, those sort of unconventional tactics, being able to just tap Dubois' left elbow with a right hook, then just boom the shot over the top, those distraction techniques. Just showing veteran moves, just being able to say, look, I've been in these rings so many times, I know what's happening here. Yes, I've only had 8 more fights than you, but that's not the point. I can touch, boom, 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 boom. And if he can do that, much like Hrgovic did, although Hrgovic did it in a more basic way, but if you look at what Hrgovic did, once he knew he had the measure of Daniel on those long shots, like his third and fourth shots were like hooks or uppercuts because he knew there'd be flesh to hit. I think his issue was he almost half-hearted it. He looked like he was tired, right? It looked like he was already exhausted when the fight started. And so he couldn't really press home the advantage he built up early on because he was landing at will. And Joshua's got a better straight right hand than Dubois has. And then let's look at defense. I'd just love Joshua to keep it really simple like he used to. He tried the experiment of the Cuban stuff with Angel Fernandez. He tried the Latino stuff with Robert Garcia. Let's just go back to McCracken stuff, just bread and butter. Like I said with Dubois, just 2 hands up. Catch the stuff on the biceps, the arm, whatever. Catch it anywhere and go straight back to work. Because in the same way that Dubois should be trying to push Joshua backwards, Joshua should be trying to push Daniel backwards. See if he's got those skills going backwards. His sister has, but has he got those skills? That's really what I'd like to see, right? But they're small things, right? The macro thing here is, can he rise to the occasion? He's been here before. He's done it for more belts before. He's done it against more experienced people before. He's done it against bigger people before. But he hasn't done it against someone that's had nothing but an obsession with beating him. That's what he's got to get used to. And I know people say Dillian, but I don't think Dillian thought it was his destiny. It was just a chance. Daniel knows it's his destiny to fight Joshua. And for those two to work out who's going to be above the other in the rankings when it's all said and done. That's what this is really about. Remember, these guys will have to see each other at boxing events. And the guy who wins will have his chest out. And the guy who loses, you'll know. You'll just know from the body language. Like when you see Riddick Bowe and Lennox Lewis, you know. And you can't overlook those things because they can all jab and they can all hook and they can all do these things. But being in the mind space to do so, hard as hell. Hard as hell. And you look and you go, right, did Joshua have the right sparring partners or did he play it safe? Is he battle hardened? Have kids like Jamie TKV been trying to take his head off? I hope so. That was the whole point of coming back home, and that was the whole point of being in that environment, was to be around tough people. I'm almost leaning towards AJ now. I'm like, oh, please, I want him to win. But on top of those tactics will always be this. When you're Anthony Joshua and your whole thing was, I need to deal with Wilder, I need to deal with Fury, I need to deal with Usyk, Daniel Dubois becomes an afterthought. But now he's front and center. Like, he can determine your legacy. Daniel Dubois is the key to AJ's legacy, his opportunity to actually win a WBC title. So to actually have all 4 belts, and even, dare we say it, a chance to become undisputed. And if he were to pull that off, and I know Ben Davison has a real appetite for that 3rd fight, if he were to become undisputed, it would radically shift the perception of Anthony Joshua. But it all starts with this fight. It all starts with this fight and winning this fight by any means necessary. to unlock those opportunities. Because if Anthony Joshua loses, we are going to review his career. We're going to be so revisionist that he is never that good anyway. That's where we're going to end up. And we'll make all sorts of excuses why Parker wasn't anything, Pulev wasn't anything, Povetkin wasn't anything, right? The 3 Ps of mediocrity. And that's pressure. Like, we ignore that on AJ. He knows if he loses this, it's problematic for his career. And you're going to start asking, okay, so what was all that about, Eddie? Told us this guy was the greatest heavyweight of all time. Now what? So there's a lot of pressure on Anthony Joshua. I would want to be in that position, but I also wouldn't want to be in that position. But boxing is such a cruel sport that this is where you get found out. But you see, when you summarize this fight, do you know what you have? On one side, you have a young man who fell in love with boxing at a young age and used it as an opportunity to build a bond with his father that remains unbreakable. And on the other side, you have a young man who used boxing as a means of staying out of jail. Both powerful storylines, both powerful journeys that bring these guys face to face on September 21st. You also have the plot lines with the coaches. In Ben Davison, you have a coach who was supposed to get Daniel Dubois, allegedly. And as a result of not getting Daniel Dubois, he ended up with Moses Atauma, allegedly. And on the other side, you have Don Charles, a coach who was meant to get Anthony Joshua, until a fighter that he was training said, you can't have me and him. Until the boxing machine said there's no way Anthony Joshua can train with Don Charles. But never forget, Don Charles is the man that Anthony Joshua stopped his car for to go and say, listen, I love what you're doing with Derek. Have you got any advice for me? And now Don has to plot the downfall of a fighter that he has so much affection for. A fellow Nigerian. And Ben Davison has to plot the downfall for a fighter that he thought he was going to take to the top of the world. And all of this happens on September 21st. All of these plot lines. And by about midnight, when all of this is shaken out, another great British rivalry will either end or ignite, depending on the outcome of the fight. But these are two men that were destined to face each other, because both think they're the better man. And as boxing fans, this is exactly what we asked for. So let's enjoy it. Let's all have our individual views, whether you watch it at home, pay for it, whether you've got tickets and you go to the pubs, however you want to enjoy this. We're not going to get one of these for a while. We don't have the depth of talent for that to be viable. So let's enjoy this one while we can, because this is a genuine domestic dust-up in front of 96,000 people. Funded by a Saudi. Crazy. But this is why we love boxing, right? This is exactly why we love the sport. So, as always, thanks for tuning into both of these. Make sure you keep, supporting boxing and all that sort of stuff. And make sure you tune into this and make sure that we elevate boxing to the epicenter of all Saturday night discussions. I don't know if the X Factor's on, The Voice, whatever, but let's make sure that everyone hears about the boxing, because we need that. The boxers need it and the fans need it. And on that note, I'll say take care, guys, and you'll hear from me, I don't know, soon, at some point, talking about something. Okay, take care.